Did you know that there were only 3 times in history that the Jewish people had their independent state? That's right, only 3 times, and you are living in one of those special times when Israel has a state. First time it happened was under King David, when he conquered the majority of the territories God has given to the Jewish people. David's son was even more successful, and he expanded the territory that the Jewish people controlled up to the Euphrates River. To see the second time it happens, we have to travel almost 1,000 years to a very turbulent times of the empires. Out of this struggle of the empires, a window of opportunity opens for the Jewish people. But it happens with a great cost. Persecutions and sufferings multiply in the Holy Land. And when it seems that the darkness is too strong, a spark of light ignites a revolution that changes Jewish history. Over 600 years before the birth of Islam, a Jewish kingdom was resurrected on those sacred lands. This is the story of Hanukkah, the story of the victory of light over darkness. And it is not only a story of the ancient past, but also a strong warning of the future events. According to the Bible, what happens during those turbulent times will repeat itself, but on a much greater scale. A suffering like never seen before and caused by one individual, a character of whom a prototype we saw in the past. As the Jewish people prepare themselves for this joyful holiday, let's remind ourselves of the story of Hanukkah. Because it's a story for all who are facing darkness. It is a story that inspires, because light is stronger than darkness. A story of bravery and determination that provides hope for future generations. This is the story of Hanukkah. After 70 years of exile, the Jewish people returned to Jerusalem and began rebuilding it. Under the guidance of Ezra and Nehemiah, the Jewish people rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, the temple, and the whole city. It is a new beginning. The Persian Empire allows a new province to be erected called Judea. And even though many Jewish people did return from the Persian Empire to their homeland, some decided to stay. And a good witness of this is the literature that continued to be written in the exile. One of the most amazing books of the Bible that we have was written in the exile, and that was the book of Daniel. And the reason why the book of Daniel is so remarkable is because it provides a lot of information on future events. The book of Daniel not only predicts the future empires that will rise, it discusses their fall, and most importantly, it talks about the culmination of human history. Daniel writes about a time when God will establish his kingdom where Messiah will rule. But the visions that Daniel receives are so dramatic and so exhausting that even for him, it's too much. In chapter 8 of the book of Daniel, we read that the prophet is given information of events that will happen in far future. He is given information about a disturbing individual that will persecute the Jewish people. And that's the person of Antiochus Epiphanes. Daniel is given graphic details of what this individual will do. But first, before we talk about Epiphanes, we must talk a little bit about the context of those visions. And it is important to understand that the context of those events are not only important for Daniel and the times after him, but also for our time because it talks about the ultimate future. Daniel lives through two great empires. First, as a young boy, he is taken to ancient Babylonia, and he saw the greatness of Babylon, but also its collapse. Then he saw the emergence of the powerful Persian Empire and how it defeated the rule of the Babylonians. But what is remarkable about Daniel's visions is that he writes about the empires that will rise after his death. And in those visions that Daniel provides, the empires are represented by many different symbols. And what is remarkable is that the symbols in an accurate way describe those empires. And if you believe that this book was written when Daniel was alive, this is the most spectacular example of prophecy that we have. This book is just amazing in its details of the future. Literal critics dismiss that this book was written in Babylon because it would have to mean that this is true example of prophecy. So let's talk about those symbols in the book. So Daniel's timeline begins with the Babylonian Empire, which is represented by the golden head. In another vision, Babylon is also represented as a lion with wings. Then we have the Persian Empire, which is represented by a chest and arms of silver or a bear. And now we get to empires that emerge after Daniel's death. So first, the Greek Empire, represented by a belly and thighs of bronze. The Greek Empire is also represented by a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, and this is extremely important to remember. Finally, we have the mighty Roman Empire, which is represented by the legs of iron. The Roman Empire is the most mysterious because the legs are supported by feet consisting of a mixture of iron and clay, and the whole empire is represented by an unspecified beast with 10 horns. The vision ends with the destruction of the statue by another empire of a divine nature that shatters all the previous empires. We read that this new empire grows like a mountain. It fills the whole earth and is ruled by the Ancient of Days. This Ancient of Days is a son of man coming in clouds. Quite an amazing but also mysterious vision, don't you think? Anyways, this was a brief summary of the visions we see in chapters 2 and 7 in the book of Daniel. Of course, we could expand on this, but for now, I just wanted to give you a correlation between the visions and the world empires for the context of this episode. But now I want to talk about another vision that Daniel receives. It complements the ones we discussed, but it also relates to the events connected to the holiday of Hanukkah. And this will be the vision of the ram, the goat, and the horn. The vision is explained to the prophet by angel Gabriel, who tells him that the ram represents the Persian Empire. And in fact, history confirms this, because often the Persian rulers would march with a symbol of a ram in front of their armies. The vision shows the ram with 2 horns, but they're not the same, because one horn grows much larger and develops later than the other. And this, of course, corresponds to the fact that the Persian Empire consisted of Media and Persia. Persia developed later than Media, but eventually it became the dominant empire and totally consumed Media, becoming just the Persian Empire. Then we read that the goat charges the ram with a prominent horn between its eyes. Prophet Daniel, who probably has no idea what this means, is told by the prophet that this refers to the future great empire of the Greek or Macedonian Empire that will rise. And the great horn on the goat's head is no one else but the great Alexander. Alexander the Great was probably the greatest commander that had ever lived. In a short time of his life, he has been able to conquer the whole known world and never losing a battle. Only when his soldiers told him that they want to return home, that they're tired even of victories, he stopped, returned to Babylonia, and died. And what is amazing about those prophecies is that they are very precise and provide a lot of details. And it's important to look at those details because then we can clearly understand what particular symbols mean. So for example, in this vision, the goat charges the ram from the west, which corresponds to where Macedonia was in reference to the Persian Empire. And we read that the goat charges the ram with rage. And this is referring to the humiliation of the Greek people that never forgot what Persia did when they tried to conquer their cities and destroyed their heritage. The destruction of Athens, first by Darius I and then by Xerxes I, was never forgotten. And that's why the Greeks attacked Persia with great rage. Then we read another little detail, that the great horn was cut off at the prime of his rule. Wow, that's again referring to Alexander the Great. He died very early, when he was the king of the world. Alexander the Great, after carving an empire of 1.5 million square miles, died of fever. Because Alexander was young, his children were also young and quickly murdered, and his kingdom was divided into 4 parts. And of course, this is also predicted by the prophecy of Daniel 8. And then we read that out of those 4 horns grew 1 more horn. It began small, but then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is our main antagonist of the story of Hanukkah, Antiochus Epiphanes. Let's listen to the Bible describing this man.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered.
These few verses are an excellent description of Antiochus' rule. He was a cunning person, gaining his position by bribes and flattery. During his reign, he made notable conquests, including the south, which is Egypt, the east, which means Persia and Parthia and Armenia, and of course the beautiful land, which refers to Israel. Perhaps Antiochus wanted to be like Alexander the Great, conquering the known world. And very soon, he found out about it. So I told you that after Alexander's death, the kingdom was divided. And the territory of Israel was a background of the battle between 2 empires that emerged after Alexander. And the 2 fractions that fought with each other was the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucid kingdom. And Antiochus IV was representing the Seleucid kingdom. And Antiochus, You gotta give him this, he was ambitious, but his problem was that the Seleucid kingdom was already exhausted from previous wars. So Antiochus had many enemies to worry about, like Armenia in the north, Parthia in the east, the new superpower of Rome in the west, and of course the Ptolemaic kingdom that he eagerly wanted to conquer. And Antiochus was quite close to achieving this goal. In 168, Antiochus goes on an expedition to conquer Egypt. He also sends a fleet to capture the island of Cyprus. And when everything looked really good for Antiochus, on his way to Alexandria, his path was blocked by a single Roman diplomat. And Rome already was feeling pretty good at that time. They were pretty powerful. Therefore, the diplomat told Antiochus not only to get out of Egypt and Cyprus, but also there was a very humiliating moment for Antiochus. You see, Antiochus wanted to show that he is the guy. So he said, "Oh, I will discuss it and see what I will do." But then the diplomat drew a line in the sand around Antiochus and told him, "I need an answer, and I need it now. Before you will step out of the circle, you need to give me an answer. And if you will not provide me with an answer, this means war." Antiochus had no choice. He had to, in this moment, say he is retreating. A catastrophe for his honor. He understood that at this point, his army has no chance with Rome. The furious Syrian king, on his way back, poured out his anger on the Jewish people, killing thousands. In the book of Maccabees, we read that the Syrian army entered Jerusalem, plundered the temple, and killed 80,000 people. Men, women, children, and even infants. But why did he do it? Well, he had enough of those Jews who didn't want to be Greeks. And after his humiliation in Egypt, that was enough. He decided the Jews will have to be Greeks, whether they want it or not. And under this huge pressure and cruel actions of Antiochus, many Jews decided to conform, to adopt this foreign culture that was pagan and unacceptable according to the Torah. And the first stage of this Hellenization of the Jews was appointing a Greek-loving high priest in Jerusalem, Menelaus. But during his failed campaign in Egypt, the Jews rebelled and replaced Menelaus with Jason as the high priest in Jerusalem. As you can imagine, this didn't go well with Antiochus, who already was frustrated with his campaign in Egypt. And that was the final straw. Antiochus ordered his army to enter Jerusalem, he slain the Jason supporters, and established his puppet high priest Menelaus. Additionally, Antiochus left one of his generals, Apollonius, to be in charge of the city, and he destroyed all the walls of Jerusalem. Apollonius built a massive stronghold called Acra, just next to the temple on the hill of Ophel. This was to control the entire city. After the massacre in Jerusalem, the Hellenization process started big time. Antiochus prohibited Jewish holidays in Jerusalem, circumcision, and converted the temple into a Greek worship center. And the pinnacle point of depravation was the pagan sacrifices that were ordered in the temple. Some sources say that he offered pigs on the altar and created a massive statue to be worshipped in Jerusalem. But the depravity would not last very long. In a small Jewish town of Modi'in, a revolution was to begin. A Jewish priest named Mattathias and his 5 sons, of which one is later known as Judah the Maccabee, begin a rebellion that spreads all over the country. And it starts with a Greek official who demands a sacrifice to the gods. Mattathias refuses, but another Hellenized Jew says he will replace Mattathias and do it. The betrayal was short as Mattathias grabbed his knife and killed the traitor. Mattathias' sons followed their father's example and killed the Greek officials and guards, beginning a revolution that would transform the whole country. Later in history, this uprising would be known as the Maccabean Revolt. The name derives from the third son of Matthias, Judah the Maccabee, a title from the Aramaic language meaning hammer. As time progressed, the Jewish revolution grew, spreading all over the Judah province, and Antiochus himself was busy at the eastern part of his empire, securing the borders from the Parthian threat. This gave the Jewish people a unique opportunity to fight for their freedom and independence, creating again a sovereign country in Judah. Decisive victories of the Jewish forces at Wadi Haramia, Bet Horon, Emmaus, and Bet Zur gave them again a hope that they can have an independent country. And things got even better for the Jewish people in 164 BC, because the evil ruler of Antiochus contracted a fatal disease and died. Antiochus' 10-year-old son, Antiochus V, inherited the empire, but obviously he was too young to rule. The unexpected events in the Seleucid Empire required the forces to be delegated to the capital, therefore abandoning the attempts to subdue the rebellion in Judea. And this was the perfect moment to retake the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem. The only obstacle was the mighty Accra and its walls. But even this infamous fortress could not stand the determination of the forces led by Judah the Maccabee. The walls of Accra were destroyed and the forces of the Hellenists defeated. Today some believe that the fortress would stand where you see this red area next to the Temple Mount. And it was a very joyful day for the Jewish people to not only reclaim Jerusalem, but also the temple. One of Matthias' sons, Jonathan, is ordained as the new high priest. The temple is cleansed, but there is one problem. When they want to light the menorah in the temple, they realize that they only have enough oil for the menorah to be lit for one day. And that was a big problem because it took several days to prepare holy oil for the temple. And this is when the miracle of Hanukkah happens. As the Jewish priests were preparing the new holy oil, the menorah kept giving light for 8 full days until the new oil was ready. And this is why during Hanukkah we light a special type of menorah called Hannukah, which has 9 branches. One of the branches is called the servant, and from that servant the 8 other branches are lit every day. Hanukkah is a beautiful holiday of the victory of light over darkness. But if we return to the book of Daniel, we understand that the story of Hanukkah is only a foretaste of the future. You see, there is a much more sinister prophecy about the little horn coming out of the 4 horns we mentioned earlier. Because when we read the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel, we realize that this individual has much greater aspirations than even Antiochus IV. We read that this individual will magnify, exalt himself, and say unthinkable things. It is easy to interpret that the book of Daniel says that Antiochus was just a foreshadow of an even greater enemy of the Jewish people, an enemy that will have demonic powers. He will be what the New Testament, and especially the book of Revelation, calls the Antichrist. And this diabolical person will do similar things as Antiochus did, but on a much greater scale. And if we want to know more about this figure, we need to turn to the New Testament, because the New Testament continues this story of this enemy of God and how it will unveil in the future. Antiochus was a pagan, and he installed a pagan statue in the temple. But the book of Revelation says that the Antichrist will also erect a statue in the temple. And this statue will even speak. And this statue will be different because it will not represent a foreign god, but it will represent Satan himself. This is, however, a topic for another episode. If you're interested in learning more about the Antichrist, let me know, and I will try to create a special video about it. And if you would like to know more about Hanukkah and the stories surrounding it, I recommend the Friends of Israel Equip YouTube channel. Chris Katolka and Steve Herzig are teaching this class, but you can also find other resources connected to the Jewish history, culture, and also the Bible. So I will put a link in the description of this video for you to check it out. It's really worth it. Also, if you liked what you saw, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting my channel. This support is very important because it helps me to run this channel. I am using some softwares that I need to pay for, but they are very useful for creating this type of content. Thank you for everybody who's supporting the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Also, make sure to check out my social media platforms, especially X and Telegram, because I share additional information connected to the current situation in Israel that I could not share on YouTube. So make sure to check out X, make sure to check out Telegram. Links to everything, including a mail sign up that you will receive a mail every time I post a new video on YouTube. You will find those in the description of this video. And that's all, folks, I have for you today. Have a great day. Shalom.